So then I would like to continue, because this is another really important topic. And yeah, I will have this presentation together also with Khaoula from Danone. And first of all, just to give an overview of land use and land use change. Because land use and land use change can have a significant impact on the carbon footprint of dairy products. And how it's included in different studies can differ a lot between different studies. And when we talk about this land use and land use change, then it's the direct land use change, it can be the indirect land use change, it's emissions associated with peat soils, and it's also carbon sequestration or carbon removals. So I will go through these three first ones, and then Khaoula will present around the carbon sequestration. And here to the right of this slide, you see illustrations. It's just an example, a fictive example, but yet a realistic one. It's just to stress that that the impact from, for example, direct land use change, peat soils, and so on can have a significant impact on the carbon footprint. So the blue part here is just the carbon footprint excluding any land use or land use change. And then you have the peat soils illustrated here with the red that is added to the carbon footprint. And then we have the yellow part, which is the direct land use change. Then there can also be this negative part of the bar, which is the carbon removals. So instead of the emissions, is a removal, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And when we talked about the direct land use change, so that is conversion of non-agricultural land to agricultural land within the value chain that you study. And the commodities that is typically relevant for dairy, it is soybean meal or palm-based products, which is often produced in countries where deforestation or land conversion occurs. And when we calculate the emissions associated with the direct land use change, then it includes all the direct land use change occurring with the period of 20 years from the reference year of the assessment. So you basically look the year of your assessment, and then you look 20 years back and how much deforestation has taken place during that period. And then you take 5% every year of the emission in the specific year and allocate that. And that is the deloc factor that you use. So you basically allocate or discount emissions equally over this 20 years. So 1/20th of each year's emission, and then aggregate that over this 20-year period. And then the IDF guidelines says that the direct land use change emission shall be included in the carbon footprint. And I think it could also be worth mentioning, because there are, as mentioned before, there are also other guidelines and standards out there. And one of the ones that is used for corporate reporting is the greenhouse gas protocol. And there is a new guideline that from the greenhouse gas protocol on land sector and removal guidance. It's been out for pilot testing, and the plan is that it will be launched in Q3 this year. And in that guideline, it separates between the direct land use change and statistical land use change. And what is typically used in an LCA for a crop when direct traceability is not possible is what this guideline is referred to as statistical land use change. And we have not used this terminology in the IDF guideline, but I think it's quite sensible, and if this will be as this in the greenhouse gas protocol, then it's very well to be aligned with that as well. So it's basically the same, you could say, but the direct land use change is when you have a direct traceability, while the statistical land use change is if you don't have the direct traceability to the specific product. And then the second one here is the indirect land use change. So the indirect land use change, that is conversion of non-agricultural land to agricultural land, not directly related to the value chain. And you can say that it typically addresses the land efficiency of the production system. And this is also maybe more used in when you do a consequential LCA, what Jude was talking about earlier. However, there are really many different ways on how to assess the indirect land use change. And indirect land use change can also provide really important insights of the production system and the land efficiency and so on. And the IDF guide recommends to include it as a sensitivity analysis. However, it cannot be aggregated with the direct land use change, since it would then will be double counting. And also to just mention again this other guideline that will be launched from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. In that guideline, they have also addressed different types of land tracking metrics. So besides indirect land use change, they also talk about land occupation or carbon opportunity costs. I will not explain that further here, but it's just to say there are different ways on how to track the land efficiency of a system. And when you include indirect land use change or carbon opportunity costs in an LCA or in a carbon footprint, it can really have big impacts on the results. So again, really important with transparency. And then also briefly just touch upon peat soils. And peat soils is emissions from drained organic soils. So soils with a really high carbon content. And this is very site specific. If a farm has peat soils, then the emission can be really high, or the contribution from peat soils can be really significant on your carbon footprint of milk. So it can have a significant impact on the results. And you should, of course, include all the relevant emissions, which is mainly CO2, but also N2O, and in some cases also methane. And here we refer to the IPCC guidelines. And emissions from peat soils shall be included in your carbon footprint if it's relevant, of course. And both when it comes to direct land use change, indirect land use change, and the peat soils, more information and also calculations as examples are to be found in the guide, and we provided some calculation example also in the appendixes, so you can have further reading that there. And with that, I will hand it over to Khaoula, but maybe Brian, you want to introduce her properly as well.
Indeed. Thank you, Anna, and thank you for sticking to time. And it's probably fair to say several of these topics, like indirect land use change and things, will be part of the ongoing work of the action team. That hasn't stopped now they've done this document. There's still plenty we can evolve and explore together and in partnership. So I'd just like to introduce now Khaoula Essoussi, and Khaoula is going to talk on the carbon removals or the sequestration component of things. And Khaoula is a global dairy sustainability manager in Danone with greenhouse gas accounting expertise. She led the development of the decarbonisation roadmap for Danone, for the Danone supply chain aligned with the 1.5 flag requirements, and was recently appointed the chair of the Sustainable Dairy Partnership at Side Platform, which builds on the DSF model. So plenty of expertise coming in here, and I think what you're seeing here in this whole webinar today is the depth of knowledge and expertise, but also right across the industry, whether they're corporations or whether they're cooperatives or whether they're academia, working together to try and get this right. Khaoula, I see you've got your slides up already. Get on with it. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So without ado, going further on this specific topic on the carbon sequestration, want to introduce you more the general consideration, because maybe we will need 2 hours alone to deep dive on carbon sequestration methodologies and guide. So just as an introduction, along the work with updating the IDF LCA methodology, we had a parallel work on working on more carbon sequestration calculation in the cattle production system, and we have now the guideline already published as IDF resources that you can consult it for all the details. But what you need to know about this guideline and the carbon sequestration, that this is focused mainly on both above the ground and below the ground carbon sequestration, or say the carbon removal, the word that is used today as a general common word on the characterization for this type of I would say impact removals. So So one of the consideration very important is that today on the carbon sequestration, when we look at the dairy farm, is a clear opportunity as a carbon sink, mainly sequestering carbon either on above the ground biomass like planting trees or hedgerows, but also below the ground and increasing soil organic matter. And at the same time, we need to consider that within these management practices that will increase carbon sequestration, we may have also potential emissions. And that's why when we look at this type of characterization of management practices, we need to account both for sequestration and potential emissions that can be as a result of reversal for certain practices and leading to carbon leakage into the atmosphere. What is also considered on this guidance that when we look at the carbon sequestration, we look at one important principle, which is the additionality. So really, what is the difference in terms of carbon stock changes over the years, and how the management practices implemented for that specific farm increased or decreased. As I say, it can be reversed and can lead to emission, increase or decrease this carbon stock over the years. We know also one of the general principles introduced into the land sector guidance as well, and the challenges is that carbon sequestration and agriculture, we need to ensure permanence, that these practices are still there, so the carbon stocked over the years, thanks to implementing these actions, are still there. Because today we know that it can be reversed, and the carbon can be released to the atmosphere again. So as part of the principles of this guidance, also quite similar to what Anna presented onto the 20 years look back period, or I would say what we defined here the guidance as the responsibility window, is really to have this kind of allocation factor when permanence cannot be ensured. And we know that we don't know how, if this practice will be sure will be maintained over the years, that in a yearly basis to account for in a percentage over the 20 years, which will consider the responsibility window to reach more the steady state on carbon sequestration. So one also of the consideration very important is that today we have a big uncertainty, and we know, I think, for some of the experts on this starting to look at this topic, that today carbon sequestration accounting methodology modeling have higher variability and uncertainties than the other part of the footprint. That's why really a measurement-based approach, more data collection and input data, primary data, is really needed to gain more credibility on the approach, and to gain also more knowledge how we can understand better these dynamics and flows over the exercise of doing and quantifying carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. So I think mainly on this topic today, what we could consider as the key challenges is this difficulty for quantification, and I just highlighted on a few words what are the main challenges of this modeling. That is today and the biological system, as we started beginning as a dairy system, with the complexity of this biological system, also carbon sequestration and carbon flows in above or below the ground is very dynamic and complex process. So we need really to have a combination of different expertise modeling tools that can lead to a certain way, more credible way to quantify these amounts. So it's not really the easiest way to apply an emission factor on the volume, like when we see for a certain equation more or less simple, because of these challenges that we have today, that carbon is actually added over time and reach a certain, let's say, a steady state or a certain stability over time when we are reaching over the years. So the potential and increasing or additional carbon sequestration on the ground is actually higher when we have on the beginning, and it's lower at the end. So the key consideration and challenges is that let's say permanence versus reversibility. We need to ensure permanence to be able to have robust claims and more credibility on the approach. When we don't have the permanence, we need to be conservative enough, and this is what the GHG protocol defined. We need to have a conservative approach how we are in our accounting considering this, and the discounting approach that is proposed in this guiding is one of the solutions of how we can consider a conservative approach when accounting on carbon sequestration. Also it's very important that to have in mind that this history impact the potential of additional carbon sequestration. So we know that depend on the year, on the practices, we will not have the same potential. So it's very also on the management practices to have this consideration, but also on the data collection. And the last element is on the data collection is a quite, I would say, heavy process to get the right data, really to get historic data over the soil characteristics, more the agronomic side of things when you look at the soil, the temperature, management practices, and so on. So that's why today is carbon sequestration is very important. It's a really opportunity for the dairy sector to prove that we are also part of the solution to keep global warming potential below 1.5, but it's also very important that this need to have a credible approach on how to approach this, because it's also linked to the credibility of our claims as a whole sector, and linked to this scientist multi-stakeholders approach. This action team working together to bring that credibility is really important. But now I think the word that I share with you is really time to pilot, to test these methodologies, the way how it is built. We did some pilots on the ground, how it works, because it will help to improve the science behind and the way how we improve this and bring this learnings back to the dairy sector as a whole. So I don't know, Anna, if you want to take from there. Thank you.
Yes, so just to summarize, when we talk about the direct land use change emissions, as I said before, they shall be included. When we talk about indirect, it should be considered for inclusion. When we talk about emission from peat soil, it shall be included. And we talk about the removals, it should be included. I mean, IDF recommends to include it, but also addresses it's more difficult and so on. And when you include either of these, it should also be documented separately for the sake of transparency. So with that, I will end the section here on land use and land use change, and then move on to the last part of this webinar.
Thank you both so much.